Hey, what did you talk about this week?
Welcome back to the Corporate Kitchen. I'm your host, Tiger, and today's episode is episode 2 of Introductions. Let's bring that lemonade to the table. Whew, I can take a deep breath. It feels good to get that first episode out the way. I know it wasn't the best episode, probably a little rough in that kitchen, huge mess. However, it is my first introduction to this. When you're doing something for the first time, it may be rough, it may leave a mess, but the plan is always to get better. The content will get better. The quality will get better. I'm finally getting used to hearing my voice, not 100% there, finding it a little bit, but we're going to improve day by day. Today's episode is going to be focused on a couple stories and key action items to take. As we mentioned on these Thursday episodes, we're transitioning from the kitchen to the dining room table. If you think about sitting down for dinner with your family, telling stories at the table, that's pretty much what this is. So we're going to take what we talked about on Tuesday, sit down on Thursdays, go over some real life examples and a couple action items. So let's talk about introductions. The first story I want to give you is from when I was a valet driver for a Major League Baseball team. During one of the homestands, for those of you unfamiliar with Major League Baseball, the home team normally plays a group of games against multiple opponents. They call that a homestand. It could last anywhere from 6 to 12 days. Was working one of the homestands, and the stadium normally opens up 3 hours before the game, just about. I tend to get there a little bit before that so that I'm prepared when the stadium doors open. One day I got there early. I come in and I look out and there's a Ford Focus parked at the valet stand. Now, at that time, the doors haven't opened yet, so I had a choice, right? I can either go out there and see what's going on with that car, or I can just wait it out. I said, I'll be nice, go introduce myself. When I get to the car, it's a guy and his son. He introduces himself, mentions that they are visiting from out of state and they weren't familiar how the baseball operations work. Therefore, he thought he would get there early, beat traffic. Him and his son will figure out how things work today. No problem, right? I explained to him how the operations work. I was very kind to him. Explain the process for valet and where he's going to go to for his suite, how all his food and drinks are free, enjoy himself, yada, yada, yada. However, the doors weren't open yet. Therefore, I could valet him, which I did at the time, but he couldn't get into the stadium. I explained to him that you can go across the street because there's a restaurant that people tend to have lunch at, eat there, and once the gates open, which should be by the time you finish your meal, you can come back and come on in. They decided to do that. They went across, ate, came back, went inside and enjoyed themselves while I valeted their car. Now they did that for that day. The next day, they showed up again early. So when I got to work a little bit before the gates open, I looked outside. There they were again. I approach him, greet him, introduce myself again, and he mentions that they finished all the activities that they wanted to do for the day and asked if it was okay if I valet his car and they go across the street to get something to eat before the gates open. Absolutely, no problem. That's what they did. They did that every day for the entire homestand. Came in early before the gates opened. I valeted their car early. It literally was the first car to get valeted. The stand wasn't open because the gates weren't open yet. And they went across the street, got something to eat, or they walked around, came in. The last day of the homestand during outbound. Outbound is when the game's over, people are leaving, so we're bringing out the valet cars as we're getting the tickets. I didn't get his ticket to bring his car up. However, someone else did, and when he got it's just a rental car. The Ford Focus was a rental car. He waited until I came up with somebody else's car and walked up to me and said, thank you so much for your hospitality. If you're ever in the area, give me a call," and handed me a business card. I didn't look at it right then and there because I was in the middle of running, of trying to get cars pulled up, run back down to the parking lot, and so on with that cycle. I just told him, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. Have a safe travel home. When I looked at the business card later that night, his title was vice president for the Aria Hotel and Resort in Las Vegas. Wow, amazing, right? Like, this was pretty cool of a person to meet. You hear that story, and it could make you think, wow, you never know who you would meet. But that's not the action I want you to take away from that story. Action number one that I want you to take away is, if you choose to be anything, be kind, right? The "you never know who you meet" answer is a because, right? It's the after effect of be kind because you'll never know who you meet, or you'll never know what type of day that person has, or because any other reason that you can think of. That's an after product. Just be kind. It doesn't matter the reasoning or the justification that you want to give to it. There's no reason not to be kind in today's world. There's so much negativity that's out there. When it comes to your introductions, there will be people, as we talked about rejection is normal, that just don't reply well to it. It doesn't matter if they reject you. Just choose to be kind. Make the world a better place. There was another guy that came for valet. He pulled up, got out the car, and was like, "Yo, I'm sorry. This is a POS." And we're like, "What do you mean? What does that mean?" He said, "There is no power steering, the windows don't roll down, and the brakes are bad." With the most embarrassed face ever. If you read his face and noticed that he was embarrassed, right, that could give you justification to say, "Oh, I need to be kind because he felt embarrassed." No, right? We just chose to be kind. Really, on our end, we were just worried like, hey, is this safe to drive? Because we have to drive straight downhill and make a right-hand turn at the bottom of the hill. So is it actually safe for us to drive? But we were very nice to him. He was very appreciative of it. When we brought his car out for outbound, he actually complimented the group and was like, "Hey, thanks for being so nice to me. I know it was a POS. I know you guys deal with a lot nicer cars, but this is what I had to bring today, my little hoopty." And we're like, and it's no problem to us, right? I mean, we just drive cars. So if you choose to be anything, be kind. The next story I want to go over is when I had my internship, final year of my undergraduate degree. I was interning at a place for the fall semester. And I was trying to figure out how to introduce the idea to the manager that I wanted to stay for the spring semester. We'd never previously talked about it before, hasn't been brought up before. So I'm introducing this idea of, hey, I would like to stay on for the next semester. So that personally, I enjoyed working there, but also too, so that I don't have to worry about trying to interview and go through the whole process again to get hired to a new company for one more semester of my collegiate undergrad. We were at a happy hour in the fall. It wasn't a Christmas party, but it was close to the holiday season. And I'm waiting for my moment to catch him when he's alone and I can introduce the idea to him. I spent time prepping the night before, thinking of the best case scenarios that I can do to bring up this idea, how direct I want it to be with it. And I came up with a couple of options depending on how I caught him. Finally, he walks to the bar counter and he's ordering a drink. I approach him. "Hey, how you doing? How do you think the year was going?" Starting that small talk before I introduce the idea. Before I even could, he actually introduced the idea. And as I was talking about how the year went, he mentioned, "I think you're doing great. How would you just like to stay on for the rest of the school year?" And the sigh of relief that just hit me was so great. It was the perfect scenario that I ever wanted, right? The best introductions that you can have are the ones that you don't have to do, right? When your mind, you're preparing and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this. And someone else brings the idea. It's like, oh, thank you for taking the weight off my shoulders so that I don't even have to worry about it. And that's where action 2 comes in. Action 2 is play the role of the listener more than the speaker in introductions. In that story I just gave you, because of my active listening, he was able to pick up, in my opinion, that I was going to lead the conversation that way and just introduce the idea himself, right? When you're active listening, people will pick up on certain cues, especially when you're nervous or when you are directing a conversation a certain way and may choose to help you out or direct it appropriately. And if they want to do the introduction to that idea, that's a win. The best introductions you can do are the ones that you don't have to do and someone does it for you, right? But in the role of a listener, we're going to have a podcast episode about active listening and what that actually means. You tend to learn a lot more than you do when you actually speak it. One of the best places to do this at is at an airport and people at work. When you're at an airport, watch how the gate agents interact with the people that come to the counter, right? You have to get a good look at the people coming to the counter, how they're positioned. Are they in an aggressive stand? Are they in a relaxed stand? Are they in an impatient stand? So that you can kind of get a predetermination of, or at least a sense of how they are feeling before they get to the counter. Then you can watch the interaction. You can get millions and millions of stories of just being at the airport and watching gate agents talk to people. As great as human beings are, we are some of the most nasty, disrespectful, and just like emotionally negligent people around, right? It's amazing how we forget about our fellow human and that we should just treat people with kindness, regardless of the level of influence and authority that people have, right? It's a gate agent. They don't have a lot of power, right? So be kind to them. You will see all types of rudeness and still kindness, right? I'll give the benefit of the doubt, right? I'm talking about rudeness because that's what's going to be interesting. Ooh, some drama. Like you're going to see some stuff. But there's also really nice acts of kindness that happen as well. But in the role of a listener and a watcher and a people watcher, you can really learn a lot of how people handle their introduction, right? The person that's introducing the idea to the gate agent, I want to upgrade, or my family didn't book all our seats together. Can you put us all together and see how that interacts? And it may give you tips on what to do. In regards to meeting people in the workplace, there's going to be a lot of times where people change jobs. So you're going to a department that you're used to talking to and meeting someone new, or you're going to a department and you're meeting someone for the first time because you're going to that department for the first time. People will tell you their backstories if you just talk to them, right? A lot of people like talking. So you will introduce yourself to people and hear all different types of challenges, all different types of triumphs, all different types of achievements if you just listen. And people will introduce their whole life story to you based off of just asking them, right? So the second action is, if you can, play the role of the listener a lot more than the speaker. I remember when I first started my first full-time corporate America position, I did a lot of networking, and not that it was a mistake. I was early in my career, so I kind of asked a lot of the generic questions that now I look back on and I'm like, wow, I could have asked that better. But I did ask the generic questions of, hey, how did you get to where you are now? What were the critical points in your career that really propelled you to where you are now? Yada, yada, yada. However, the people on the other side told me their life story. They introduced their whole life story. They probably told this story 3 million times, right? So for them, it's rehearsed. For them, they can introduce it like it's the back of their hand because they probably said it 3,000 times. And for me, I'm just absorbing it like, wow, this is great. This is great. This is great. And absorbing it as a listener, not only for knowledge for me and my career, but also in the sense of I'm going to have to do this at some point. If I have aspirations to sit in this person's seat, I'm going to have to do the same thing. So how do they handle it? Does it sound rehearsed? Does it sound like they are actually enjoying the conversation? Am I being thought-provoking in my questions so that we can have good dialogue instead of him just reading the script that he has, right? So remember that when you're doing your introductions, to just listen to other people sometimes. All right. And the last bit of stories I'm going to talk about is the path that actually got me that first job. The first job I had coming out of college, I got at a conference. And that's one of the reasons I went with the conference example in the introductions episode on Tuesday, because I was going to do an example here. So I went to a conference at the career fair. There were companies that I already had pre-screen interviews with. Therefore, when I got to the career fair, I can just have the normal round interview with. But there were also companies there that I wanted to speak with for the first time. Had my elevator pitch ready, had my suit on, had my resumes. I was ready to do the introduction with these companies. And at that time, it was not customized, right? I have my base set of lemonade that I was going to give to all these companies based off the conversation, take their feedback, and manage each conversation on a case-by-case basis. It was a little nerve-wracking, right, for the first time. When you're not aware of how that whole setup and operation develops, it was really nerve-wracking. I didn't know the person I was talking to was just someone who was early in their career helping the company recruit people, right? For me, it was like, ooh, you're out there, you're in corporate, you're the big dog. Let me join you, please. So I was nervous. I did some, I would say, successful introductions in which, from the conversation I had with the rep, they preceded me to an interview. And there were times that the companies gave me a full rejection. One of the reasons for the rejection that I got when I asked for feedback is that they were looking for interns and co-ops, right? That made me feel better because I was looking for a full-time position. They were looking for intern and co-ops. We just weren't a match. Got it. There were other times where I did get rejected, didn't really get any feedback. So that was something that hurt, but I didn't dwell on it because I already had interviews set up. I had to pick myself together. You know, even though that company was a preferred company, I got to get to these interviews. I got interviews to do. So I did probably a good 12 to 15 interviews across different companies. What I didn't know at the time is that when you have larger corporations, they tend to have multiple rounds of interviews. And here's a big thing that separates people pre-COVID to after COVID. A completely normal thing pre-COVID across all companies in all industries, larger corporations, was that the final interview was on site. Regardless of where you were, they'll fly you out to the headquarters, you'll take a tour, you'll get lunch, you'll meet some people, and you'll have your final round or rounds of interviews on site at their facility. That doesn't happen a lot. So if you're just coming out of college and now we're in post-COVID in 2025, you may not have that opportunity. Companies are starting to get away from that. But man, I have to tell you, it was a great opportunity. I used to joke with my manager, who was my boss when I was in my internship, about how it would be so nice to be a career interviewer during those times, because they would literally pay for your flight, your rental car, your hotel, wine and dine you. It was a really nice experience. And from a learning perspective, it was super, super great because you got to walk these factory floors. Mind you, confidentiality, you can't share anything. However, it was insight that you would have only gotten being a badge employee, right? So just interviewing, not being a badge employee, they're trying to recruit you. You walk the factory floor. You may not choose that company, but you gain some really valuable experiences by just walking and seeing all that stuff that you can take with you and build upon your repertoire. So the company that I actually ended up going with, they flew me out. I interviewed with a lot of people. It was multiple panel interviews. There's going to be a podcast episode and interviews. I was prepared for those. I did my introductions to start those interviews, and I wasn't that nervous that time. What was really nice about that really helped me, and I implore everyone to do this, is to find that common ground that makes you realize that we're connected, right? One of the most eye-opening things when I was going through these interviews across the country is how different the United States is in every part of the United States, right? A manager in California is going to give you a really different perspective than a manager in the Pacific Northwest, than the Midwest, than Texas, than the South. And it's like, well, the South, Georgia, and Florida aren't the same. So, you may get even more subset as you dive down deeper. The connection I had with this specific manager, though, that was doing the interview on me, was that we previously worked at the same company. The company I internshiped in, this person actually worked in their previous job. That was very nice. And I implore people to really do that connection if you can, so that you can connect human to human and realize, oh, okay, like, hey, this is a normal conversation, right? That's how I treated my interview, had the conversation, and ended up getting the job. So very happy with that first career job. I'm not at the same place now. However, that was like very, very valuable experience for me. But for the third action item, I know I mentioned the whole connecting with people. That's not the action item. The third action item that I really want you to take away from that story is asking yourself why. Why am I doing this introduction in the first place? When you're nervous, which as you should have butterflies when you're doing something for the first time, you got to kind of go back and do some self-reflection on why am I doing this, right? And that may help boost your confidence in order to achieve whatever you're seeking with your introduction. This is going to be especially critical when you have to deliver bad news, or when you're going to deliver an introduction that you're expecting to have negative feedback on, right? If you're telling someone, hey, we're not on target to hit our goals, right? It's not necessarily fully bad news because you do have a recovery plan to help reach it. So at the end of the year, you will hit the goal. Just right now, you're not on path to hit it. Everyone's going to blow up on it. The executive is probably going to be like, this is horrible. The whole sky's falling out, et cetera, right? When you're going to do an introduction, just ask yourself why. Why are you doing this? What's the purpose of this? The conference example I gave, I was doing those introductions so that I can get a job. That was motivation enough for me. I need a job. Therefore, I am going to put my heart into these introductions because I do want to work for a living, right? I like money. I do want to work for a living. And that is the mindset that you have to give yourself so that you're prepared, right? And if you have the jitters, if you have the butterflies, that's good, right? Because at the end of the day, if you don't, and you're not worried about it, then you don't need these, right? You don't need these tips. You're good, right? Podcast's over for you, right? Go do your introductions. But if you're not that person where it just comes easy for you, just try this, right? Be kind. Try to be a listener more than you are a speaker. And just ask yourself why you're doing that. And I promise things will get better. Introductions will get easier. All right. Last story. I was traveling to my company's headquarters. And we were having a training conference at headquarters. I got there the night before, and I got there late because it was Father's Day. Spent the time with my family, flew out that night, Got to the hotel super late. It was 10 p.m. I'm in jeans, a sweater, got my bag, checking in, not expecting to see anyone from the company there at that time, even though I knew that there were people from the company staying at that hotel, right? It's late at night. We got to start early in the morning. Hopefully I don't see anyone. And I didn't. Was able to check in, got to my room, got some sleep next morning, right? I get up, go through my morning routine, and now it's time to get breakfast. I was actually going to have breakfast with a friend. I put on my entire business suit except for my jacket. And I don't have my Padfolio with me, right? So I'm going downstairs for breakfast with everything but the Padfolio and the suit jacket. I get to the lobby. Lobby's clear. Don't see any coworkers. Cool. I sit down casually in the chair in the lobby. And not even 2 minutes go by. And the president of the company walks in, looks at me, and greets me, "Good morning." And I'm looking and I'm like, of all the people to walk through that door, Jesus Christ, like I don't even have my suit jacket on. So underdressed. So introduce myself to the president. We have a quick conversation. And I run back upstairs and go get my suit jacket right after that conversation. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not getting caught like this. So I put my suit jacket on, come back downstairs. My friend's ready. We go have breakfast. Leaving the breakfast area, I see my mentor, who is a vice president at the company. We are meeting actually for the first time in person. Previously, all our engagements have been virtual just because we are located in 2 different states. But based off the person's picture, I noticed, hey, this is that person. How are you doing? And I was just shocked. I was like, oh my God, I'm not expecting to see you here. And it really struck me that, wow, okay, not only do you have to be ready to introduce yourself and do introductions at any point in time, they're usually going to catch you when you're not even ready, right? I just ate. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to run upstairs and brush my teeth real quick just to make sure I don't have any hot breath. And here I am walking right outside. Bam, there's my vice president mentor. Oof. Okay. So talked to him for a quick minute and the conversation went great. I mean, no problem at all. Went upstairs, got my Padfolio, and headed to the seminar to find out that he was there. That person was there, as well as the president and a lot other members of the executive team, because they were having their own conference right next door. And it's like, oh, okay, fine. Just never drop that shield. Be on top of your A game at all points in time, and just be ready to do introductions at all points in time. It's actually was a really cool experience though, because the best people you meet are at the most random times, like the most random. It was really cool to see that person, my mentor, in person. Like I said, I haven't seen that person in person, but to have that interaction, it's like, now I know your face. I know who you are, know what you look like. Cool. You're a human being. I know you're not AI. You're an actual human, and it's good to talk to human. I know in this virtual environment, it's getting more normal to do all your introductions virtually, but don't discount doing an introduction in person, right? If you are in a position or a field in which you are predominantly talking, interacting, collaborating in a virtual world, that's not an excuse to never get out the house or never get out the area to meet other people person to person. As much of the world is embracing virtual collaboration, person to person is still going to be required. So in that retrospect, don't forget that introductions always need to happen, whether it's virtual or in person. However, try to do person to person. And when we go back to the action of listening, right? It's easier to listen to someone if you're standing right in front of them than it is than if you're virtual and you're watching them during a Zoom, if they choose to even have their camera on, right? You can read body language, you can read facial expressions, you can see what they're doing with their hands, what they're doing, what they're writing, and get a lot more information from a active listening perspective in person than you can do online. Oh, I just remembered. I should tell you about...
Hey, you said last story. Can you wrap this up?
Oof. Okay. I enjoyed working on this menu item with you this week, but let's come to an end while it's still hot. Remember, the ending to one story is the beginning of another. There will be more in store next week at the Corporate Kitchen. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Tiger. Until next time.